Elara's mornings began before the sun. The alarm buzzed at 5:15 a.m., slicing through the heavy stillness of her apartment. In that moment between sleep and waking, there was a silence she almost cherished, a brief, unclaimed space before the world made its demands. Then it began. Her phone vibrated with messages from coworkers, notifications from clients across time zones, reminders from her fitness app. She moved with mechanical precision, brushing her teeth while replying to emails, tying her hair back while scanning calendar invites. There was no pause, only motion. Yes, I can take that on. Sure, I'll get it done by Friday. Of course, not a problem. Her days were stitched together with yeses, so many that she couldn't remember the last time she'd said no. Not to her manager, not to her friends, not even to her own body, which whispered louder each day that something was off. People loved Elara. She was dependable, selfless, always smiling. At work, she was called the glue of the team. At family gatherings, she was the one who remembered birthdays, baked the cakes, made the reservations. Even in romantic relationships, she was the giver, the forgiver, the one who bent without breaking, until she did. It started subtly, a headache that never quite went away. Sleepless nights followed by foggy mornings, a growing numbness that made her feel like a spectator in her own life. Then one morning, she stood in the elevator of her high-rise office building, and her chest tightened like a vice. She couldn't breathe. By the time the doors opened, she was curled into herself, palms sweating, heart pounding like a war drum. No one noticed. She walked into the office smiling. That night, in the quiet of her bedroom, Elara sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her reflection. Her eyes were ringed with fatigue, but it was the emptiness in them that startled her most. She looked like someone she used to know, someone who had once been curious, creative, maybe even happy. A notification pinged. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she opened her journal, a gift from a friend she hadn't seen in months, and wrote one sentence. I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be everything for everyone. And with that, the unraveling began. The next morning, Elara turned off her alarm before it buzzed. For a moment, she simply lay there, watching the early light slant across the ceiling. Her heart beat with a strange mix of dread and defiance. She knew something had shifted, even if she couldn't name it. She called in sick. It felt reckless and unnatural, like stepping off a moving train. The silence that followed was unfamiliar. No urgent pings, no blinking notifications, just the hum of her refrigerator and the distant sounds of city life creeping in through the window. She made tea, not coffee, not the caffeine-fueled shot that kept her moving, but chamomile. It tasted like surrender. For hours she wandered around her apartment, noticing things she hadn't really seen in months. Dust gathering on her bookshelf, a withering plant by the window, photographs that captured a version of her who laughed with her eyes. Her journal sat open on the desk, the words from last night echoing louder now. I don't know who I am. She picked up a pen. This time the words came more easily. What if I stopped pretending? What if I stopped trying so hard to hold everything together? Would the world really fall apart? Would I? The thought terrified her, but beneath the fear was something else, a longing for rest, for authenticity, for a version of herself that wasn't defined by what others needed. Around noon, she stepped outside. The sun was sharp, the sky indifferent. She walked without destination, her feet leading her through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. The coffee shop on the corner still had the crooked open sign in the window. The bookstore smelled of old pages and quiet comfort. Inside, she found herself drawn to the self-help section, a corner she'd always avoided. The titles made promises she didn't believe in. Reclaim your life, boundaries are love, the art of saying no. She scoffed, but her fingers lingered on the spines. One thin volume caught her eye. The Quiet Within. No subtitle. Just those 3 words. She bought it without reading the back. That evening, wrapped in a blanket, tea cooling beside her, Elara opened to the first page. It didn't offer answers. It offered questions. When was the last time you were still, not asleep, not distracted, just still? Tears came unexpectedly. She pressed the book to her chest and breathed. Not deeply, not evenly, but she breathed. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her own quiet, not as a burden, but as a beginning. The word lingered in her mouth like an unfamiliar flavor. No. She whispered it at first, alone in her bathroom mirror, testing its edges. No. Again, louder. Not angry, not defensive, just certain. The sound was jarring, not because of what it meant, but because it belonged to her. She tried it in sentences. No, I can't stay late tonight. No, I won't be able to help with that. No, thank you. Each time the resistance came, tightness in her chest, a twitch of guilt, the instinct to soften the edges with a smile or an apology. But she kept going. She practiced until the word began to feel less like rebellion and more like self-respect. The first real test came on a Wednesday afternoon. Her manager popped into her office unannounced, phone in one hand, a stack of reports in the other. Hey, can you take this on for the Friday deadline? I know it's last minute, but you're always so great at pulling things together. Elara felt the old reflex rise, the nod, the automatic smile, the yes waiting on her lips. Instead, she inhaled slowly. I can't take that on right now. I have 3 other deadlines this week, and I need to give them my full attention. Silence. Her manager blinked, then shrugged. All right, I'll find someone else. Just like that. No thunderclap, no collapse of trust or reputation. The world didn't end. Her worth wasn't questioned. If anything, her manager seemed impressed. That night, Elara took herself out for dinner. Not with friends, not for a meeting, just her. She sat at a small table by the window of a quiet Italian place she'd walked past 100 times. The waitress didn't ask if someone else was joining. Maybe she saw the solitude in Elara's posture, or maybe she saw the peace. Elara ordered wine. She brought her book. She read. She paused. She stared out at the people walking by, not with envy, but with ease. For the first time in years, she wasn't chasing time or productivity. She was simply being. Later, walking home, the city felt different. The noise wasn't overwhelming. It was background. Her thoughts were louder now, but they weren't chaotic. They were questions still, but more honest ones. What else have I agreed to that I didn't really want? Who am I without the yeses? She didn't have the answers yet, but with every step, every breath, every small, sacred no, she was learning. The next morning, Elara awoke with a strange stillness inside her. Not quite peace, but not anxiety either. It was something in between. A space that used to be crowded with obligation now felt like a quiet room with a single open window. She didn't rush to fill it. She stayed in bed longer than usual, eyes tracing the cracks in her ceiling. There was something soothing in their imperfection, in the reminder that things could fracture and still hold. Her mind drifted, not to her to-do list, but to memories she hadn't touched in years. Childhood afternoons spent drawing on the porch, the smell of her mother's perfume, the way her father used to ruffle her hair and call her his little compass. She had once known how to follow herself. When had that compass stopped pointing home? In the days that followed, Elara began to declutter, not just her apartment, but her habits, her digital life, even her language. She turned off most notifications, deleted the apps that made her feel behind. She stopped filling silences with automatic pleasantries and small talk. It wasn't about becoming distant, it was about becoming intentional. The shift was subtle but seismic. She began to notice how often people spoke without listening, how often she did the same. She started pausing before replying, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than usual. At first, it made others uncomfortable. Then, curiously, they started matching her pace. In those pauses, something shifted. One afternoon, she met Mia for coffee. They hadn't seen each other in months, though they used to talk daily. You've changed, Mia said, not unkindly, her brow furrowed in quiet concern. You seem quieter. Are you okay? Elara stirred her tea slowly. I think I'm learning how to be okay. That sounds lonely, Mia said. It's actually the first time I've felt like I'm with myself, Elara replied, meeting her friend's eyes. I didn't realize how often I left me behind to be with everyone else. Mia looked away. The words lingered between them like fog, soft and dense. Then she nodded. I get that. I think I've been doing the same. They didn't say much more. But something in the air had shifted. Honesty now lived where politeness used to. Later that night, Elara stood in front of her mirror, not just to brush her teeth or fix her hair, but to really look. She saw the dark crescents beneath her eyes, the faint crease between her brows, the slow return of color to her cheeks. Her face was fuller than it had been, a consequence of sleep, of stillness, of not skipping meals to meet deadlines. But what struck her most was the steadiness in her gaze. She looked like someone who had survived something invisible. She whispered, I missed you. And for the first time, she felt it wasn't just a platitude. She was reintroducing herself to her own reflection, to her own life. And the mirror, for once, didn't feel like glass. It felt like a door. The idea of healing had always conjured something neat in Elara's mind, like crossing a finish line or stepping into the light after a long tunnel. But it wasn't neat. It was jagged and unpredictable, more like walking barefoot through a room full of broken glass. And some days it felt like she was the one doing the breaking. It started with a dream. She was underwater, her hands reaching toward the surface. The light refracted and far. She couldn't scream, couldn't move. When she woke, her pillow was wet with tears she hadn't known she'd cried. Her chest was tight, her breath short. She stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the panic to pass. It didn't. So she did what she never used to let herself do. She called in sick again, not with an excuse, not with guilt, just honesty. Then she called her therapist. She had gone a few times, years ago, after a breakup she'd pretended didn't break her. But back then, she'd been too focused on fixing things, being functional. This time was different. This time, she didn't want to be functional. She wanted to be free. In the therapist's office, the room was small and warm, lined with soft chairs and soft light and soft questions that didn't have soft answers. How often do you feel like you're performing? Her therapist asked. Elara blinked. Most of the time, she admitted. And who is the performance for? She didn't know how to answer. She wanted to say work, or family, or her exes, but that wasn't the truth. For everyone, she said finally, and no one. It's like, if I'm not perfect, I'm invisible. If I don't give people something, they'll leave. Silence followed, not judgment, not pity, just space. That sounds exhausting, the therapist said gently. Elara nodded. Her throat was tight. That week she cried more than she had in a decade, not always about something specific. Sometimes the sadness came like rain through an open window, sudden, soaking, impossible to stop. She let it. She let herself grieve the girl who had been everything for everyone. She mourned the friendships she'd outgrown, the love she'd given too freely, the years she'd spent chasing someone else's definition of worthy. She even mourned the ambition that had once lit her up, because now it just felt like pressure. At night, she wrote, not for clarity, not for insight, just to let the feelings live somewhere outside her body. I don't know if I'm healing or unraveling. Maybe it's the same thing. I miss the girl who used to laugh without thinking about who was listening. I'm scared that if I stop trying to be good, I won't be loved at all. The journal held it all without flinching. One evening, as she sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by old photographs and books she hadn't touched in years, she felt something stir, something like truth. Healing wasn't about becoming her old self again. It was about letting her old self rest. She whispered a quiet apology to all the versions of her who had tried so hard to keep going. Then she lit a candle, opened the window, and watched the flame flicker in the breeze. The night was quiet, but she wasn't alone in it anymore. She had herself, and for now that was enough. There were places in Elara's memory she had avoided for years, rooms in her mind she kept shut, doors she had quietly locked without realizing it. But healing, she was learning, wasn't just about saying no or finding peace. Sometimes it meant walking back into the rooms you thought you'd sealed forever. It began with a photograph. She found it while cleaning out the bottom drawer of her closet, a place stuffed with half-packed boxes she'd meant to sort through after her last move. The photo was small, a little faded. It showed her as a teenager, standing beside her mother on a beach that no longer existed the way it had then. Her mother's arm was around her, the wind in both their hair. Elara was smiling, but it wasn't the beach she remembered. It was the fight the night before. She had forgotten about the silence that followed, how her mother had woken her with an apology masked in pancakes and syrup. She had accepted it because she was always the one who accepted things. She didn't know how not to. She placed the photo on her kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. That version of her, awkward, hopeful, eager to please, was still somewhere inside, still waiting to be told she didn't have to earn love. In therapy, she brought it up. "I think I built a life around being needed," she said, "because if I wasn't needed, I wasn't wanted." Her therapist nodded. "That's a heavy thing to carry." Elara looked down at her hands. "I didn't even realize I was carrying it." Over the next few weeks, memories came back in waves. Moments of being silenced, overlooked, expected to be strong because you're the mature one. She remembered the exhaustion of keeping peace between feuding family members, of being the emotional anchor in relationships where she was never truly seen. She had confused being essential with being loved. And now as she opened those locked rooms, she began to let herself feel what had always been too big to process: the loneliness, the resentment, the hunger for tenderness that didn't come with conditions. One night, she wrote a letter she never intended to send. "Dear Mom, you taught me how to care for everyone but myself. You didn't mean to. I know that. You were tired and trying, but I became your therapist, your buffer, your mirror. And somewhere in that, I lost the girl who needed to be held too. I still love you, but I need space now. Not out of anger, out of self-respect. I'm learning how to belong to myself again." She folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of The Quiet Within. Later, she lit a candle, not for ritual, but for remembrance, of the girl she had been, of the woman she was becoming, of the truth she could no longer unsee, that love without boundaries wasn't love. It was sacrifice, and she was done bleeding quietly for the sake of someone else's comfort. The rooms were still there. Some would stay locked a while longer, but now she held the keys. Elara had never liked silence when it came from other people. It reminded her of withheld affection, of tension humming beneath the surface. Growing up, silence meant something was wrong. Now silence meant something sacred. It had been weeks since she first stepped away from her routine, and the noise of her life hadn't exactly disappeared, but it had shifted. She had reclaimed pockets of quiet, and within them, she was beginning to find herself. But then came the loneliness. It snuck in slowly, not as an event, but as a question. What happens when you finally say no, and no one notices you're gone? There were fewer texts now, fewer invitations. People stopped asking because she had started saying no, and perhaps they thought she didn't care anymore. Or maybe, she thought with a pang, they were just used to her being the one to reach out, to arrange, to hold things together. She sat in the cafe where she used to meet friends every Thursday. Now she was alone, the chair across from her, empty, her tea cooling untouched. She missed being needed. She missed the illusion of closeness, even if it came at the cost of exhaustion. But she couldn't go back, not to the version of herself who said yes just to feel connected. Her therapist had warned her, when you begin to heal, you'll lose things that made your pain feel meaningful. She didn't understand it then. She did now. But amid the ache, there were new connections forming, quieter, more intentional ones. A colleague she barely knew asked if she wanted to grab lunch, not to talk about work, but because you seem like someone who listens well. A neighbor knocked on her door one evening, holding a tin of cookies and an invitation to a community dinner. She almost said no. Instead, she said she'd think about it, and she meant it. And then there was Jamie. They met at a local poetry reading. She hadn't planned on going, had almost talked herself out of it, but something in her craved voices speaking truths out loud. Jamie read a piece about silence, how it can hurt and how it can heal. When he finished, Elara found herself clapping longer than the rest. They spoke after the reading, cautiously, like two people unlearning the same language. Over coffee, Jamie said, "It's strange, isn't it? How much of our lives we spend trying to be what other people need, instead of what we actually are." Elara met his gaze. I used to think they were the same thing. He smiled, not out of amusement, but understanding. They didn't exchange numbers that night. It didn't feel necessary. There was something comforting in not forcing the moment to be more than it was. On her walk home, Elara thought about the spaces in her life, the ones she used to fill with noise and obligation, and the ones she now left open on purpose. Not emptiness, space, for breath, for truth, for the people who would meet her where she actually was, not where she performed from. When she got home, she turned off her phone, lit a single lamp, and opened her journal. Healing is not linear. Some days I crave the chaos I walked away from. Some days I wonder if I'm too much or not enough. But tonight, I am simply me, and that is enough. She closed the journal gently. Outside, the city pulsed on. Inside, she was still, not alone, just whole. The past has a way of showing up uninvited, sometimes as a memory, sometimes as a person, sometimes as a feeling you thought you buried deep enough to forget. For Elara, it arrived in the form of an email. Subject: Hey, been a while. It was from Nathan. Her breath caught the moment she saw his name. 3 years had passed since their last conversation. 3 years since the slow unraveling of a love that had once made her feel seen and then made her feel small. She had loved him the way she loved everything, fully without boundaries until there was nothing left to give. The message was short, casual, like they were old friends. He was in town. He wondered if she'd want to grab a coffee and catch up. Part of her wanted to delete it, to preserve the peace she had fought so hard for. But another part, the braver, more honest one, wanted to see him. Not for closure, not for nostalgia, but for something else, to see how much she had changed. They met at the same cafe where he used to read his favorite philosophy books, where she used to sit quietly and listen, always the listener, never interrupting. When she walked in, he stood up, smiled the same half-smile she remembered. Elara, you look different. I feel different, she said simply, sitting across from him. Their conversation was polite at first, circling around safe topics: work, travel, the city. But then came the inevitable moment, the glance that lingered, the question unspoken. I've thought about reaching out for a while, Nathan admitted, stirring his coffee. I wasn't sure if I had the right. You didn't, she said gently, not out of cruelty, but clarity. But I understand why you did. He looked surprised. You've changed. I had to. There was a silence then, heavy, honest. He looked at her like a reflection of something he didn't recognize anymore. I miss how things were, he finally said. Elara nodded. I don't. It wasn't bitterness that made her say it. It was truth. She had mourned that version of her for long enough. The woman who bent to be loved, who swallowed her nose and wore a smile like armor. She wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't going back. I'm happy you're doing well, she added. Nathan reached across the table as if to touch her hand, but paused. You really are different. I'm becoming myself, she replied. They parted without promises, no exchanged numbers, no lingering hugs. Just a soft goodbye, and the kind of closure that doesn't need words. That night, Elara stood in front of her mirror. For the first time in years, she didn't search for flaws or signs of fatigue. She didn't rehearse anything or pretend. She simply looked. This woman. She had cried in silence and laughed in solitude. She had learned to say no and to mean it. She had survived the ache of letting go and the fear of starting over. And she was still here. More than here. Whole. She lit a candle on her nightstand and opened her journal. Some ghosts don't haunt us to hurt us. Sometimes they come to see if we still belong to them. But I don't. Not anymore. The flame flickered, the page turned, and Elara smiled to herself. Not for anyone else. Not for show. Just for her. Elara woke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains. But something was different. The usual tightness in her chest, the anxious knot of expectations and obligations, was softer, more distant. It was as if the space inside her had grown just enough to breathe. She sat up slowly, fingers grazing the cool sheets, and took a deep breath. Not the shallow, hurried kind she'd known for years, but a full, steady inhale that filled her lungs and settled in her bones. Today was a day with no plans, no meetings, no yeses waiting on her tongue. A day to simply be. She poured herself a cup of coffee, but let it sit untouched, watching the steam rise and curl in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the city was waking with its usual noise and chaos, but inside, Elara found stillness. She pulled out her yoga mat and unrolled it in the center of her living room. The first stretch was tentative, her body stiff from months of neglect. But as she moved through the poses, the stiffness melted away, replaced by a warm flow of presence. For the first time in a long time, Elara was not escaping from herself or the world. She was moving with them. Afterward, she sat cross-legged, eyes closed, focusing on the rhythm of her breath. In the silence between each inhale and exhale, she found a new kind of conversation, a dialogue not with obligations or fears, but with the pulse of life itself. Her phone buzzed, a message from a friend inviting her out, but Elara didn't reach for it. Not yet. This moment was hers. She opened her journal, the pages filling with the steady ink of reflection. Today I am learning to sit with myself, not to fix or change or rush away, just to be. She realized that all the yeses and nos, the boundaries and the letting go, were steps toward this, reclaiming the space between breath and being. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, Elara stood at her window watching the world. The city was alive, pulsing with stories and dreams and noise. But inside her, there was peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from perfection or control, but the kind that comes from acceptance. The messy, beautiful acceptance of self. And in that acceptance, Elara found hope. Not the loud hope of promises and plans, but the quiet hope of a soul learning to rest. The dawn broke gently, as if the world itself was holding its breath for a moment before exhaling into the new day. Elara stood at her window, watching the pale light creep over the rooftops and streets below. The city stirred awake, but inside her there was a stillness that felt like home. She thought back over the months, the spiraling exhaustion, the suffocating pressure, the endless yeses that had once defined her. How far she had come, and how many small battles she had fought quietly, fiercely, with herself. There had been tears and fears, nights when the darkness pressed in tight, when the silence felt unbearable. But there had also been light, small sparks of clarity, moments of truth, the slow but steady reclaiming of her own voice. Elara stepped away from the window and walked to her desk, where her journal lay open, pages filled with raw, honest words. She traced her fingers over the sentences, memories inked on paper like footprints on a path she traveled. I am not everything to everyone. I am enough. I am whole. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that comes not from happiness alone, but from the deep knowing that she had survived, and in surviving, had begun to live. Elara picked up her pen and wrote one last entry. Today I choose to be gentle with myself. Today I choose peace. Today I am free. She closed the journal, a quiet promise folded into the pages. The sun had risen fully now, bathing the room in golden light. Elara breathed it in deeply, feeling it fill the empty spaces inside her. Spaces she once feared, but now welcomed. Because she had learned that in the silence between the noise, between the breath and the being, she could finally hear the most important voice of all, her own. And in that voice she found freedom,